Alright, now we've just stitched our seam with a back stitch straight and a back stitch at the end. For practice, I want you to take your paper and now I want you to sew a 5/8 of an inch seam on the other side. Remember, we start at the top. We have our seam gauge at 5/8 of an inch. We're going to move it over till it hits the seam gauge. We're going to drop our presser foot. We're going to back stitch, which is 3 stitches forward, 1, 2, 3. Put the machine in reverse. Always turn the handle towards your body. 1, 2, 3. We just went over the same stitching. Now we're going to leave our fingers off of reverse. We're going to step on our foot pedal, and now we're going to stitch our 5/8 of an inch seam. And remember, we always look right here. We're not going to look at the needle. We are going to look where the paper hits the seam gauge because we want a nice straight line. And we're going to steer the paper. We don't push, we don't pull, we just steer it. And then when we get at the end, we're going to back stitch. So we're going to put our machine in reverse, turn the handle towards you, and go back 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. And for convenience, to get it off, we're just going to run it off and forward. Lift the presser foot, put the needle in its highest position, and remember, when the needle's in its highest position, the take-up lever is in its highest position. We are going to pull out 12 inches, and we are going to cut our thread close to our work, both ends. We don't want any extra threads. Then we're going to come back to our machine and make sure that our threads are underneath the presser foot. Now, what you have is seams on both sides. The next thing that we're going to learn is how to pivot. This is a new lesson, to pivot. A pivot is to make a point, so it allows us to go in a different direction. So you're going to take a pen or a pencil, and we're going to draw a line. We're going to draw some zigzags that connect our 2 seams. This is just for practice so that we can learn how to change direction on the sewing machine. And in order to change directions and make points in corners, we call it a pivot. And so it's easier for you to see where your pivots are points. And I'm going to change directions. You can do this to stitch a pillow. When you have 4 corners, you have points so that you could go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, since we are not stitching a seam, we're going to take our seam gauge off. We don't use that anymore. We're going to take our paper, we're going to put it into the machine, and we're going to start at our lower point. Remember to drop the presser foot. We are not going to use reverse at all. You are not allowed to use reverse in this practice session, nor do you use reverse when you pivot. So now let's start. I'm going to stitch very slowly right on the line. And when I get very close to that point, I'm going to stop and I'm going to take my hand wheel. And I'm going to get as close to that point as possible. When I get close enough to that point, my needle stays in. The needle must stay in. Why? I'll tell you why right now. We're going to lift our presser foot, and now I can change direction any way I want to go. But the needle has to be in to anchor your work. Otherwise, you will not change direction. Everything will come apart. Then, once we change the direction we want to sew in, we have to remember to drop the presser foot, and we continue on. Remember, when we get close to the point, we're going to use our hand wheel to get right over as close as possible so we do not go past our point. Then lift up and drop. The idea is to get closest to the point without going over it. If you go over it, then you can't turn to come back down. And we're going to do a series of zigzags all the way down. Now, when you're sewing on fabric, of course, we're not going to be marking our fabric with magic marker or pen or pencil. You will just have to know when to make that pivot. This is just for practice purposes, so you get the idea that when you want to make a point, the needle must stay in, lift the presser foot, turn, drop the presser foot, and then continue sewing. You can make stars, you can do your initials, you can do lots of different things when you know how to pivot, as long as you keep the needle in, lift, turn, drop. And I have one more to do, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like on the side without the marker. Same process, lift the presser foot, needle in its highest position, pull 12 inches, cut your work close, threads close to your work. So now there's my zigzag, but what does it look like on the other side? There you go. There are all my points. When you have that done, we're going to practice again. Only this time we're going to go in the opposite direction, and we're going to go that way. Okay? So now what I would like you to do is to stitch the opposite direction. And this will give you enough practice so you learn how to do a pivot. Turn it again, drop. Notice how I'm stopping and using the hand wheel so I don't go past where I want my point to stop. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and take it out so you get an idea of what it looks like. That's what it looks like on the other side. Now, that's just for practice, but what if I wanted to actually stitch something like a pillow? We're going to do that next. Okay. Now, I told you that this was just for practice, so we could learn to do our points. But what does it mean when you're working on a project? Well, let's say that we want to make a square. All right, I'm going to put this in. I'm going to drop my presser foot. I'm going to stitch. But now I want to change direction. Keep the needle in, lift, turn, drop. Keep the needle in, lift, turn, drop. Keep the needle in, lift, turn, drop. Needle up, presser foot up. I'm going to cut my threads. And now I've made a square. I can do my name, I can do stars, I can go in any direction as long as I keep the needle in, lift, turn, keep the needle in, lift, turn, keep the needle in, lift, turn, keep the needle in, lift, turn. I can do all different kind of designs as long as I know how to pivot. And you can be as creative as you want to. And I can come back just a different one. I'm getting a little abstract here. But I think you guys get the idea. And see, I've got to get rid of all those threads. So it's nice and neat. So you make sure you always cut all your threads off. So you have something that's very nice and neat. All right, and that's how we pivot.